Hi, welcome to Building SaaS with Python and Django. My name is Matt Lehman, and I'm the streamer for this stream where we work on Django applications. It's a Python web framework, and I walk you through building Python apps, specifically on a project that I'm working on for a homeschool application normally, but today we're doing something different. Last week, I mentioned that I'm working on a local hackathon. It's a virtual event, something I'll share a link in the chat over here, and it's for good causes in my local community. I emphasize the point that if you're able to help your community in some way, you should try and do so. And so that's what I'm doing with this hackathon. It's also an opportunity to work with other technologists who are in my area, and we're going to continue on the path to building the application that the group is building. I think last time I described the application, and at the end of the stream I said there's going to be one of two outcomes. Either today will be a show and tell and then get back into the homeschool application, or I'll be frantically trying to finish the remaining pieces. Hi Mike, welcome. Thanks for joining in. And as it turned out, the last week has proved that we're going to fall more into the latter category today. We've got some stuff to do. My presentation is tomorrow at noon my time, and there are some pieces that are not done. So we, for our application, as a reminder, the application is something that's for student homelessness. It's for a group. I live in Frederick, Maryland, and Frederick is in Frederick County, Maryland. So the group that I'm doing stuff for is called SHIP of Frederick County. And SHIP stands for the Student Homelessness Initiative Partnership, I think. But what they were asking for is some capacity to enable people that are homeless in my community, that are younger, student age. They might not. They might even have homes, but be resource constrained, like don't have provision at home for providers that can help feed them, get them all the meals. So there's a lot of people that are in their community like that. And these folks tend to have phones, so I'm told. And so we're making a resource site for them that gives them quick access to the things that they want to use. Last time we worked on some of the main views of the site, trying to put them together with the information that's going to be needed. We looked through some of the models that went into this, and so on. In the intervening time, I have met with the sponsor for the group, and he has given us some direction on things to do. We've also had opportunities to sort of refine the design and add functionality, and we're going to continue on that tonight. Before I get into that, though, I should say, if you want to keep up with me, I've got a link above where you can sign up for my mailing list where I write about Python and Django. I've got a gigantic Django article coming out hopefully tomorrow, assuming that I can fit it in with this hackathon project. And I'm also on Twitter as MB Lehman. I'm on Patreon as MB Lehman if you want to support me there. I do want to thank my patrons of Mark and Patrick and Eric and Rob for your support. I really appreciate that. Oh, and and Ahmed as well. And I'm super grateful that you all are able to contribute in that way. There's a discourse link below. So if Discord. I get those messed up. There's a Discord link below. There's a chat if you want to ask questions that don't fit in a tweet. You're welcome to do that as well. So that's what we're going to do tonight is try and finish off the app, basically. I have a job, so tomorrow morning before the actual presentation is kind of out of the question. So I'm going to be finishing up the app as much as I can here today and make it as presentable as possible in preparation for the final presentation. So let's talk about what remains to be done. I'll show you the state of the app as it is right now, and then we'll get going. So what I have here, I've got actually two sites presented. One is the real app for the repository, for the project, and then the other is the one that was designed by or mocked up by the designer on the team. And I'm essentially trying to make sure that her design makes it into the application. So here's the app. We gave it a name. We called it Ship Haven. It's a resource site for people, so Haven felt appropriate given that it's talking about ships. And this is the app as it exists today. There are essentially going to be, in the end, just 3 pages on this app. And the main page is going to be an index page, and there will be an announcements page, and there's going to be a service category page. And I'll describe each. So the idea behind this is someone who is homeless, who needs some kind of support, will visit this page. It's a mobile web application, and click on one of the categories that we have defined. There's only 6 of them, I believe, and they bucket the big kind of needs that someone might have. And we have nice, gigantic buttons here. One of the limitations that's going to happen on this stream is you're going to see me working in the browser in the responsive mode, and things might seem a little jumbo-sized. But I assure you that we've been doing plenty of kind of testing on devices, and even though things might look a little big here, they seem very reasonable when you're sitting there with an Android phone or an iOS device. It works out. So what we've got is the actual categories that we're going through, whether that's legal advice, money, shelter, education, the big things that students who are struggling might need. And that's the primary interface on this site. And then at the bottom, we have a space for announcements. And then at the very bottom, there's your standard kind of footer stuff. But our sponsor also wanted a capability for someone to sign up and get email announcements, or really any kind of push announcements. But the thing that we were going to be able to do in a 2-week time frame was email. So it's still missing some information here. This shape that's here is representative of Frederick County, where I live. It might look like Georgia to some of you, but it's just meant to be notional of like, here's the county, and a form will go here that will ask for an email address. I'm not going to do that part tonight. Frankly, it's not going to get done before the presentation, but that's where that bit is intended to go. So this page, as you see it, is essentially done. These are both buttons at the top that will bring up a dialer and dial 211. That is a service number that's available to Maryland residents. I don't know if other states also make this 211 number work. I can't speak to that, but I know that it works. I know for a fact that it works in Maryland. So if anybody needs service help, they're able to get it. And we wanted that was presented as the thing that needs to be front and center to anyone who's homeless in case they have dire needs. Then we've got the list of categories themselves that will allow people to drill into what's important to them, and got those all presented here. And then at the bottom, we've got these announcement briefs. And if we click on one of them, it will take you to an announcements page. It was hard to tell, but it would actually take you to the specific announcement. So we're imagining a future where there's probably 5 to 10 announcements at any given time, and you want to jump straight to the meat of that particular announcement. So the announcements page is done. The main page is done. There's one page left to do, and that is the specific category page. And something about responsive mode that I've noticed in Firefox is that my back button doesn't work. I don't know if it's trying to simulate being a mobile device such that you don't get that back button, but whatever. We're gonna use the top UI to get us back to the home, and then we'll click in here. And this is going to totally fail because I made a database change right before the stream started, trying to get stuff done, and I didn't finish it off. So let's shift gears. We're not ready to touch the UI yet. There were some information that had to change, and final pieces of information that the designer added of additional information about a service. And we need to make those work before we can come back to the user interface here and finish off the design. I will say that my goal tonight is to do 2 things. One is to finish off this page. It is the last page that needs to be fixed. I think it's mostly there. I've copied a lot of the template design over, and we just need to add some polish to it once the data is in place. The other thing that I will be trying to do tonight that is new to me, I know it exists in Django, but I've never done it before, is a feed, an RSS feed. So one of the features that was requested by the sponsor was, we're allowing people to sign up through essentially a MailChimp email sign up thing. And he was asking us, how can we get the announcements out there? Do I have to put them in the Django admin dashboard here, and then also send out a separate email to the MailChimp in order to broadcast that? That doesn't seem great. So what can we do? And as we discussed it, there is a feature that exists in MailChimp that will read from an RSS feed and then automatically send out an email if you set up some stuff on the MailChimp side, anytime a feed change is detected. So the secondary thing that I want to do, if we have enough time, is to get to that feed and make sure that the site is able to produce a feed that MailChimp is going to be able to read to send out announcements. Again, this is a functionality that is a piece that's built into Django. So I'm going to have to read documentation to you, or with you, I should say, and we'll explore that together, because I've never actually built a feed using Django's built-in tooling. So that should be a fun little adventure. But let's start with the data that is missing. And this is like teeny tiny. I can barely read it myself. I'm guessing you as a streamer can hardly read it as well, especially with any artifacts that might be coming from streaming compression. So what this is saying is that we're essentially missing a column that I defined. And so the site is not working right now. It's trying to access information that's not there yet. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to kill the web server for a moment. We don't need that running. And this is the template that we'll get to in a minute. And we're going to switch over to the models file. And this is what it's blowing up on right now. So one of the things that the designer added was the notion of what organization is providing a service. So for instance, we have a group in Frederick called the Frederick Rescue Mission, and they largely serve the homeless men that are in the city and the county that may be dealing with just lack of employment, lack of residence, drug addiction, whatever it is. It's a safe home for those folks. So we want to be able to call out not only the service, which might be something like daily lunches that they make available, but also connect to them to the organization name itself. So we want to be able to split the name of what's being provided from the who that's providing it. And so that's the addition that we need to add. I think it's the only model change that's on the service. Frankly, I don't remember how much of this model was fleshed out last time. There was probably just a single address field, and there were some requests to make some data changes. So if you're looking at this model and it looks dramatically different from last week, these are just fields that were requested by the sponsor that really make the service impactful for the site. So we're going to do this. We're going to go into the test for this and make sure that this is tested. So I want to assert that organization name has a value, and that should fail because it's going to be empty, because as I've defined it in the model here, in fact, that's probably even going to fail. We're going to need to add a default. Otherwise, Django is going to say, this is going to fail for any existing service. You need to provide a default. It's going to complain about that. So we are going to assert that organization name has a value for the factory stuff. That makes our test data more accurate when we're doing some testing. And then the other piece that's going to be needed is to actually go into the factories file. I'm using Factory Boy, which is a package that generates fake data. And we've got a service factory that will create a service. And so what we need to do is add an organization name. And this time, it's not really a perfect fit, but I know there's a faker field called company that is close enough to an organization. So I'm going to say company, and then just to prove that this is now working, I'm going to add a not, and we can see the kind of data that faker is adding. Martinez Johnson. I don't get it. What is it going to say if we do it again? Oh, it's doing like legal names. When Montgomery and Anderson LLC, or attorneys at law kind of thing. Cool. So we've got an organization name with the service. Okay, so what's left for the model is we need a migration, I guess. That's going to be critical. So we'll do manage.py, make migrations, and it should just add the organization name to the service model. And we can look at what that looks like. The migrations, it is organization name, and you can see it here. It's doing an add field on the model service, on the model named service, and adding organization name. That's all good. Okay, next. What are we doing next? We must migrate. So I have a local SQLite database that is actually the test data that we're working with. And now we've added organization name. So that should be present. And if we start up the site again, well, actually, before I do that, let me stop here because I'm about to launch Heroku Local. The way that we are deploying this site, and actually, in fact, if you want to view it yourself, you're welcome to do so. We put it up on Heroku. It is at one of the randomly generated Heroku names right now. It's on the free account, so it's going to take a second to load, but I just experienced that load. But if you want to check it out, here's the URL to it. And it doesn't have any of the data there yet, but if you want to play with it on your phone or something like that, you can do that if you're following along. So here's what it looks like up on the actual site. But Heroku doesn't work with SQLite. And this is something I noticed in the forum, the Django forum. There were folks that were asking about, like, my site it doesn't keep data around and I've got it deployed to Heroku. What's going on? And as we dug into it, I'll even type it out here. SQLite doesn't work on Heroku, and there's a good reason for that. Heroku is a platform as a service. It will put your application in their infrastructure, and their infrastructure moves machines around frequently. Well, maybe not frequently, but enough that it's disruptive. So if you try and deploy something there and you create a file in that deployment, then as soon as that application gets moved from one server to the other, that file that you added is suddenly gone. SQLite, which is a database that is in a file, will blow up in that scenario, because think about it. You start the application, you run your migrate command, and it creates that SQLite file in that application instance on that server at that time, and suddenly it's put in a different spot. Well, now you have no database anymore, so it's going to fail. So instead, you have to make your application connect to an external database. Postgres. I buried the lead. Whatever. Heroku uses Postgres as its kind of default database that you can use, and that's what we're using on this application. So all of this data will be persistent no matter where the application is put. But for local testing, because this is not a complicated app and we're not using any of the advanced Postgres features, it's totally valid to use a SQLite database. But I'm also using Heroku Local here as my command. So there's a Heroku, it used to be called the tool belt. I think it's called the CLI now. And it's a set of commands that you can run to manage Heroku, to add new, scale it up to horizontally, to add new workers to it, whatever you want to do. But it also includes this local command, which makes your application behave in a very similar way to how Heroku is going to run it, which is to say that it's going to expect its configuration to come from environment variables. So Heroku Local will read from a .env file and load that stuff into the environment and run that way. If you're familiar with Ruby, there's another tool called Foreman that is pretty similar. and it also runs the proc file, which is the way that Heroku wants you to specify how your application is going to run. So if I cat the proc file really quickly, we can see that I'm running a gunicorn process with the application as project.wsgi, and it's dumping all of its log output to standard out. And there's a release command that every time I do a deployment, it will run the migrate command to apply any new migrations. So I don't have to do that in advance of anything or after the fact. It will just be part of the release. Okay, so enough context out of the way. We're going to run Heroku local now and come back over to that page that was showing an operational error. And did I actually run migrate? I did. Okay, so this page should load appropriately now. And it's loading up all the images, and here we go. Okay, so this is the page that we need to add to, and it's time to look at the template and fix the rest of it. This is the service category detail page, and the bit that you're seeing right now, this section, is the stuff that is defined by this section block here. So we need to come in here and add an actual service, because without a service, we can't see an example of the stuff that we're trying to finish off. So what we're going for, I'll show you what the designer's version of this, and put it in responsive mode so it gives it a fair shake, is something like this. And this is pretty close. You can see there's some wonkiness that I've already fixed with like the buttons in the top, and there's some other bits that are there. So we're going to be adding a section for each service that's going to look like this. It will have the organization name, it'll have the service name and description, a little call out link, and then all of the buttons that will go into the service itself. Each of these buttons, so here's fun stuff that you can learn about doing web app development. There are ways to make the buttons behave better on a mobile device. The obvious one is like an email. You may have even seen this if you've done enough web development, of having a hyperlink, an anchor tag, so the A tag in HTML with an href value of mail to : and that's standard. And what that'll do on your phone is actually bring up your mail client. So that's kind of cool that the mobile browsers know how to do that already. If this one was new to me, if you add an anchor tag that uses TEL : followed by a phone number, then it will bring up your dialer, so you can dial stuff that way. And then we have this other information that is going to give, like this one, if you click the address, it should launch your map program. Sorry, I don't know why I blanked out on map, but it should launch maps. And I add a little bit of JavaScript that makes that work between Android and iOS. I'll show that in just a second. And then finally, there's just a plain hyperlink here that will take you to an organization's website. So this is the mock-up. So we need one service to have this kind of information to prove it out. And once I have one, I think that'll be enough for the stream to satisfy what I think needs to happen. And then we can move on to doing a little bit of cleanup of a view that we're not going to need anymore, and then move on to the feed stuff that I talked about. And if you have any questions along the way about this project, please feel free to ask. This is meant to be kind of a back and forth if there are questions that come up. But otherwise, I'm just going to carry on. Okay, so I need to get into the admin, and I'm running this at localhost 5000. So I'm going to launch a new page, use the admin site, and we'll add a service. You can see there are absolutely none of them. And so, well, let's use the service that the designer put in herself. So we've got the FCCAA I don't know. Firefox is trying to simulate touch mode, so I got to turn that off before I can highlight things, apparently. So that's going to be the organization name. And then the name of the service is this Community Action Health Center. And we'll take the description here, drop it here. And then I'm going to copy the link for the website. And the street address. Let's see how that's, so, well, she added some extra flair that looking on it, that's not really going to work when you're on a mobile because there's no ability to hover. So maybe she was thinking that if somebody's actually coming at this from a browser, I'm not really sure. She's doing her darndest, so can't fault her for that. Let's take the street address, and this is going to be Frederick. Yep, 21701, that's the right area code. Let's do a quick lat-long lookup. I found this cool service where if you give it a place like this, it can give you a latitude and longitude. And I'm doing latitude and longitude because it gives, you can get a better, a more accurate link, I guess, to Google Maps, because they know how to do lat-long very naturally. And if you try and provide it just an address, then it will do its best and probably do actually pretty well, I would imagine, given that it knows your location if you're on a phone. But yeah, if we can provide the latitude and longitude to do this stuff, all the better. Let's take the values here and plop them in. There's a latitude and longitude, and she's got the operating hours here. So there's some cool attributes here that I think are nice. About the design, which are pretty fun, is we programmed in some colors. So the service has a color, and we used them. We did this using Tailwind colors. So if we've got all of this design is done with Tailwind, which is a pretty sweet CSS framework. And if you do like background color, you can get a bunch of colors, and you can see they all follow this standard format of color goes in the middle, and it's got BG on one side and a number on the other. And the thing that we did that was kind of clever is that by giving a service category a color, we could make all of a related type have a same color output. And so that what that's going to do, and I don't think I'm going to add a separate service to show it off, but you can hopefully imagine it, is, you know, this one is a teal green color. In fact, it's BG teal 500. So we assigned the category of basic needs the teal color. So all of that will be represented in teal. And for each other category, we have also applied this color. So we're dropping the color in and using it, using standard names that Tailwind recognizes to quickly customize the look and feel of each category. So it's a pretty effective way of making each category look like its own uniquely designed page. And I think it came out pretty great, in my opinion. So let's finish this off. Whoops, I just copied the wrong thing. Shoot. Because we need to, what I'm trying to do is make sure that this looks right and matches pretty closely to what she has here. So I apologize that this is taking a little longer. It's not exactly exciting streaming, but sometimes you just gotta mess around with the data. And this is gonna go in the basic needs. I guess another thing I can call out that is noteworthy. No, I don't want to create an address. Is if you're new to Django, something that you can do, like you might have observed that the stuff that I have on Heroku matches identically with the stuff that I have locally in terms of categories. They are character for character matches. And you can do that by creating what's called a data migration. Let me see. Django data migration. Just jump straight to it. Data migrations aren't always the right fit, but sometimes they're perfect for a job. And you can either run some Python or run some SQL. And I'll quickly show the migration that I did to populate the initial categories. So if you run a data migration, the migration itself is at the bottom. And if you inspect migrations, you can see that the operations are normally like migrations.add field, and they're generated by Django, and they instruct the database engine to issue data definition language, DDL statements, to the database to create new columns or drop tables, or whatever it is. But you can also hook into the migration system to do extra things. And so what I'm doing here is what's considered a data migration, and you can read about it at that link, and we can run some Python code. And so the Python code that I'm running is this one right here that says add categories. So I essentially get the service category model, and I create a list of service categories that I want to exist in every environment, and do a bulk create on them. And so that means that in my deployment, since migration is guaranteed to run, this set of categories will exist no matter where the app ends up living. So if we start a brand new site, this site is too small, but a more complicated site might have a variety of environments. It might have a development environment, might have a staging environment, might have a production environment. You can use data migrations to ensure that content is exactly the same across them because it's constructed in code. So that's a really cool tool. Where was I? So we've added our bit of data. Save the community action health center here, and is that what we want to call this? Well, let's add something to the admin while we're here, because that's not a very descriptive name. We need to make that better. So the service category admin is just showing the name of the service, but I think it's also going to make sense to show the organization name. So let's do that and refresh. Did I do that right? Maybe it didn't go because of Heroku didn't load that thing. I'm not really sure. Oh, I'm looking at services. Bah, I added it to the wrong thing. No wonder. Wrong spot. Okay, try again. So by doing this, we should now get not only the service that's there, but also the organization name. And I think this will be useful for the administrator to help give him context of what was this for again, or was it this one? Because he might end up using service names that are very similar across different organizations, like different kinds of shelters or whatever. And that's just going to be useful to list them both. Okay, so we've got that piece of data, and I want to go back to this page and do a refresh on it. Now we have a service to look at. Hopefully it should pop up here. Great. It does. And yeah, cool. It's looking very close to how it was presented. I want to modify some things about it. There were some changes I made to the design to make things consistent and uniform. Everybody on my team was kind of rushing through stuff, so I think that applies even to the design some. And so there's there's some lacking pixel perfect precision here. Most noteworthy to my eye is, like, you can see the gap here. This is a margin 4 or padding 4, and this is clearly more than that. And so I think what that does is it adds an inconsistency to the look and feel. And so I want to adjust those things so that we give that some more space. And then you can see how, like, I don't know if this is slightly compulsive of me, but I'm just like using my eye down the list here, and you can see that not one of those three things lines up. And so that's the last bit I want to do to polish up the template, and then we'll move on to the next thing. So to do that, we'll inspect the element. That's going to be the easiest way to find this stuff and figure out what is actually triggering it to behave like that. So there's a bunch of things going on here. So we've got a div that's wrapping some stuff that she put in that is width full, and it's got a padding 6 here. So I think we need to change that padding 6 to be a padding 4. We're going to come into this page and find P6. Oh, there it is right there. I'll change it to a P4. That's still not going to fully solve the problem because there were some additional padding, I believe, even on the elements, on more nested elements. So if we look at this now, we've got the outside container, that purple box, is showing the padding around this whole div. And then as we dig in, you can see, what is she doing here? There's trying to figure out where that's coming from. What's not clear to me is, I don't know how to highlight this because I've got my mouse on the stuff that's letting me toggle between these two, but I'll try and highlight it with the cursor. So there's a small gap that I'm observing that's between, the padding 4 comes out here, and then there's this tiny gap on the actual border that is not going the rest of the way. You know what it could be? I bet, so this is using a border top. I wonder if there is the left and right border. Yeah, let's play with this theory. So she added border top 8 in order to make that teal bar appear. So let's try border, not top, but left 8 and border right 8. And I'm not going to keep these in here. This is mostly just trying to figure out, like, what is causing that difference between the sizing here and here. And I suspect, no, I'm wrong. Okay. So there's some extra padding that I don't understand, or maybe it's margin. What I'm going to do is you all might see my screen normally, but I have flux on, so everything's orange to me. So perhaps this is showing yellow and I just haven't, yeah, that's what it was. Flux was hiding all of my yellow, so I couldn't actually see that there's margin on there. And there it is. Now that I can see there's margin, it must be this MX2. Okay. Lesson learned: when working with dev tools at night, turn off flux. Of course, now it's like burning my eyes, but I'll deal. And there we go. Okay. So for me personally, I feel like this just adds a symmetry to this. Is like, now we have this line lining up with this line, and I don't know. Let's check on this thing too. Yeah, there's no padding or margin on this. So all three of these things are lining up. And that level of pixel precision, I don't know. I just like it, but maybe you think I'm wasting my time over insignificant details, which is totally fair. Okay, what should we do with the rest of this. I think we just need to test and make sure this stuff works. So I'm going to show you how I've been testing this. This is something that's really cool as well. Because yeah, it's great to test in a browser for a while, but you really miss out on the little details that come up when you're actually on a phone. So the way to test this, or a way to test this, which I think is really good, is to use a tool called ngrok. Grok in programming speak is like to understand something. You grok a subject. I don't know the origin of it, but that's what it is. And the N part of this term, I believe, is network. So what I'm going to say is ngrok HTTP 5000. And what that's going to do is I've got my local web server here. And it's serving at port 5000. It's broadcasting over not just localhost, but the whole broadcast space here. And I can tell ngrok to find whatever's at port 5000 and essentially tunnel that to the internet. So by starting this up, I've now got a URL to work from. And, well, geez, how am I going to do this? I don't know what's in my email, so I'm going to make this private for just a minute. I apologize. I'm going to go into my email and put it on my phone. And I'm just going to paste the link to myself. There's probably a better way to share links with yourself to get it to your mobile device. But I don't know what it is off the top of my head. And so once I do this and create some stuff over here. So I just sent myself an email of the link from ngrok. And now I'm bringing up my own phone here. And I'm going to click on this. And it brings up, it connects through that tunnel through ngrok. I should be able to switch back to, oh, no, I've got my mail open. So what I'm seeing on my phone here is exactly what you're seeing up here. Well, not exactly, because I'm on the index page, but if I click through, now I'm seeing, this is probably going to come out horribly, but now I'm seeing exactly what's on the browser. And the purpose of coming through here is I'm going to click from my browser on each of these links to make sure they're working. There's certainly ways that you could do automated testing, but this is a hackathon. This is like a best effort to make sure it's doing that. I just clicked the mail link and it took me to the right spot, so that's good. The operating hours, this time one doesn't do anything, so I can click it, but it doesn't go anywhere. That's fine. It's just adding symmetry to the rest of the thing. I clicked the dialer and it brought up the right phone number, so that's cool. I'm clicking the email address and it brought up my Gmail client with a compose email message, so that's good. Whoops. Oh, shoot. And then I'm hitting the rate limit of ngrok, so I clicked too fast. But this last one is just a hyperlink, so I'll click it here. It's probably good enough. What did it do? Ooh, maybe it failed. All right, so I do need to check that out. And while I'm waiting, so ngrok, if you have too many clicks, unless you're like a paid member, will throttle you, which I don't blame them. They're offering a pretty cool service, and here I am using it for free, so I'm not going to hold that against them. But something didn't work correctly, and it was the website. Here it is. So I had called it in the model as website, but I hadn't added that by the time the designer was working on this. So she added something herself and chose a different name. So that was going to be broken. And this perfectly illustrates why you test stuff out. I'm going to see if I've gotten over the rate limit. And we're going to come back to the bottom. And now I'm going to click the link. And cool, it's going to where it's supposed to go. So City of Frederick page. Great. Okay. So I think that gets us to the completion of the template. And going through it, I mean, the template itself is a server-side rendered template. It's not very exciting, but I'll walk you through a little bit. I am punting on the entire JavaScript stack. So somebody who's a longtime JavaScript person might look at this and be like, that is disgusting what you just did. I added a script block to a random template on a site. But you got to remember a couple things. You got to remember this is a hackathon. And so it's not always optimal. And even if it wasn't a hackathon, like if I didn't need a lot of JavaScript, this thing does the job. It's just a little function that's being added to the DOM to do whatever you need it to do. It takes a couple of parameters and that's it. And then it does this stuff. And the whole reason that it exists is if you're on iOS, the way to get to the Maps application is by using this special thing that Apple has with a Maps : as a prefix. Whereas if you're on other operating systems, we just want a standard URL. And Android will detect that you're going to Maps and say, do you want to navigate in the Maps app? So it works that way. So this little bit of JavaScript gets added here. And then later on, I do an on-click call. I jumped straight to where it's being used. And you can see, this is where it gets a little gnarly and people might kind of up their nose at what I'm doing here, but that's okay. I'm okay with that. So in the on-click, I am calling that function that I defined above, and I'm taking the server-side data and plopping it in as the parameters. So it's like a pre-selected thing with the right latitude and longitude if it's available. And so it just does the correct thing. So that's the chunk of JavaScript code here. And, I do agree that it could probably be better placed in a different kind of block tag. I put it in this main block tag just because it was easy. It might be better served in something that is added as a block to the head on the base template, but I didn't set that up, and it wasn't worth it because it's the only chunk of JavaScript that's going to exist on the whole site of all 3 pages. We've got the main section at the top that declares what kind of category this is, and then we're going to loop over each of the services. And you've seen most of this design. So there's like the part that you want to read about that's up at the top here. And then there's all of the actions that are below. And because we've made each of these actions be optional, they're wrapped in if statements, if clauses, so that we don't display the buttons if the site administrator, the director for this organization doesn't have that information. We have examples of local stuff where the organization doesn't use email, so there's no email address to give, and it would be silly if there was an email button with then no field to actually email somebody. So that's the entire template. Bunch of optional pieces, bunch of display data, looping over some stuff, even with some JavaScript thrown in. I think that's kind of cool. I think there's, especially if you're getting into a new project, hold off. My recommendation is hold off on adding new languages and new technologies for as long as you can. So I could have fallen down a rabbit hole of saying, you know what, I need some JavaScript code, therefore I need a JavaScript framework, and okay, now I need to add Vue.js or React or whatever, and then start installing JavaScript packages and doing NPM stuff. And you can do that, and that's fine. But if you just need a sprinkle of JavaScript, maybe sometimes just use the sprinkle of JavaScript. Okay, that's all I'm going to say on that. So let's kill this. We got the web server done, and let's do a quick review of what we added before we move on. So I'm going to add all of this to my Git stage, and then we'll look at the diff. So we changed the admin to add the organization name. We added the missing field of organization name on the model, and there it is on the models again, and there it is on the factory again, and the test. So it's a lot of repetition there. And then the last bit is changing the template to use the new design. And we tested it out with ngrok, which I guess I don't need that running anymore. I'm going to shut it down. I also shut down the local server, so it wouldn't have worked anyway. And we found, and through that process, I found that one of these things didn't work. So hooray for testing. Okay, so coming over to this side, we've got these files, and we're going to commit them and say add new design for service category page. Okay, let's do a quick win and then move on to the feed thing, which is totally new for me. The original design had 2 clicks. The design had something where you'd click a category, and the category would display the name at the top and list out a brief description of each service, just the name of it and a truncated version of the description, and then it would have a link that said read more. The read more link would bring up another page that would list out all the information you just saw, but it would do it on just a single page. So one page would have one entry, pretty minimal. The designer, and I think she made the right call here, said, look, there aren't enough services within the city of Frederick to merit needing to split that out. Let's just put them all on one page for a single category, and people can scroll. And I think that's probably the right decision. What that leaves us with is an extra view that we don't need anymore. So if we go to the core URLs file, there's the index view that we saw, that's the top level page. There is the category itself, which is the page that all the services that we just finished. And then there's the actual service detail page, which is just bringing up details about an individual service. This page is not needed. So what I'm going to do is delete it from the URLs file. I'm going to come to the views and delete the view itself. Thankfully, it was only a couple lines. And then we're going to go to the core test views area and delete the one test. Okay. And there's one more bit to clean this out fully, and that's the template. So there's a core template. Whoops. Got that backwards. Template, core. We've got the service detail page. So this is the old version, and it's pretty similar to what you just saw, but it's not as pretty because I'm not a designer. I wrote this initial version, but we don't need it anymore. So we can now delete this page. Okay, and then as a sanity check to make sure I didn't delete all the wrong stuff, I'm going to look at the site again, just quickly. I just refreshed all my chat. That's okay. There wasn't a big discussion there. Okay, it's loading up images. I don't know why it does that on localhost. Sometimes it takes a while to load the images. They're not big image files by any means. Okay, the 2 main pages that we care about, or I guess the 3 pages that we care about, are all working. So that's good. And we can also run the test suite to prove that all the tests still pass. Okay, so we'll do, whoops. Here's what we deleted. We deleted the test, the URL, the view, and the template. And we'll say remove unused service detail page. That's what we're doing. Okay, now it's time to explore the great unknown for me. I saw this feature in Django, and I read some of it. I didn't read a ton of it, but it's on generating feeds. And there are some tools that are in there, but I don't know how much we have to supply to make a valid feed that will be useful to the service. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the Django RSS feed documentation. And I guess this is called the syndication feed framework. So I don't know if we have to add, I'm trying to look through here to see if we have to add an app before this will work. It might just be content that we can import and get going. But as a reminder, the goal here is to make, so we're going to make an RSS feed for the announcements. And the reason is to connect the data to MailChimp to automatically send out announcements. Again, this is a functionality of MailChimp that if you have an RSS feed, it can automatically send email if it detects something new. And so if we can get the RSS working, then and this project is selected as the winner, and we actually hook it up for this organization, then we provide a really good path for minimizing the amount of work that the administrator has to do. Okay, so let's read some docs, and then we'll try and put together the proper feed. I already don't like these docs, but you should. Okay, I love the Django community. I'm going to be a little critical of the Django community right here. You shouldn't have to say all you have to do. For some people, writing a Python class is really intimidating. I think this could be phrased in a way that is not so trivializing. But anyway, that's just commentary aside. We have to write a Python class. That's all we have to do. We'll see how hard that is. We need to add the feed and point to an instance of it on our URL conf. So the feed class represents a feed. Cool. And feed class is subclass. They can live anywhere in your code base. Okay. So let's make the place for that then. This is an announcement, or this is associated with announcements, so that we have an announcements app. And I am specifically not going to put it in a views file. It's not a view in the literal sense. Maybe internally the feed model or that feed class does boil down to a view. I didn't check it. But I'm not going to treat it as a view. It doesn't seem like the right thing to do. So we will go up and create a file called feeds. And what else should we do here? Maybe we could do some test-driven development on this. That might be fun. So let's go to the test views area and do a split on that for the moment. Oops, wrong direction. I want to do a split this way, horizontal split. And we'll go up a directory and create a new file, and we'll call it test feeds.py. All right. And we're going to do import from test plus. Import the test case class. And in a lot of ways, this is going to behave like a view, because at the end of this, what's still happening is something. It's going to happen to be a computer in this case, but a user could do this too. Could go to a URL, which I'll probably call announcements feed, and get the content, which an RSS feed is some XML content. And it should contain announcement data. So we have announcement factory that we can use, and we have tools to check on, use it like a client and do a GET request. So this could be a pretty straightforward test case to do of adding a class that is a test, and I'll probably end up calling this thing the announcement feed. And so I'm going to name it with a test case that's similar, and we want to check pretty much just a 200 kind of condition. So we'll give it a test OK scenario. We're going to need an announcement, and that's going to come from the announcement factory. And in order to get access to that, we'll do from .factories import announcement factory. Okay, and then we're going to do what are we going to do? We're going to do a get on the view, on the URL. So it'll be a self get on announcements, which is the app name where all the URLs are defined, the app namespace or whatever it's called. And then the thing that we have not created yet is going to be called feed. So that's what we want to do the GET request on. And then the final thing that we want to do is I want to assert a couple things. I want to assert that the title of the announcement is in there somewhere, and that the description of the announcement is in there somewhere. I don't know what fields those will correspond to in the feed, but I want to make sure they're both present. So let's go over to Test Plus. And there is a way to check content. Where are you? Check response contains. That's what we want. So I want to say self assert response contains, and the stuff that goes into that assertion is the text that we want to check for. So the announcement, I believe I called it a title. We'll check on that in a second. I don't remember what the model called it. And we need the response itself. And in order to get the response, that comes back from self.get on the test plus test case. Okay, so we've got title, and we've got, I think the other one is description. All right, let's see how we did. Oh, I put that in the wrong file. Ah, gosh, shoot. Okay, we'll fix that in just a minute. So title and description is right. Oh, there's another test that we're going to need on that feed. I put this in the totally wrong area though. There's an announcements app. So all of this stuff, all of this code should go into announcements test file. We should have a test feeds over here. Paste all that stuff and then go back to the core one and delete it over here because that's not going to be right. And that was going to fail because the announcement factory is in the announcements app, so it would have just failed even on the import. I expect this right now to totally fail as well because there is no announcements feed yet. It's just going to complain about, I was just going to give a 400 here, but if you dug into it and saw the debug content, it's going to say, I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, next we need to go to, got that announcements feeds file that we're not using yet. Let's go to the URLs area, and the name of this thing is going to be, it's going to be a path to, we'll just call it feed, and we'll say feeds announcement feed. And here's where I don't know if this is supposed to be an instance or what. We need to go read more of the documentation to see what that's supposed to ultimately look like. And we need to import feeds from the local Django app. Okay, let's return to the documentation, see what this looks like. They've got an example here where they're defining a feed, cool, and they give it a path, cool, no problem, and then they just instantiate it. Okay, so this is the right structure here, like that. But this is going to fail because that announcement feed doesn't exist, right? I'm going to let this, I'm going to try error-driven development that I mentioned the last couple streams, and I'm going to create a feed that doesn't do anything except for subclass from the appropriate feed class that Django says to come from. And my hope is, if I keep running this test, we're going to go until this all works. We have the URL wired, we have the URL wired appropriately, and we're down to making the feed class do what we want it to do. And yeah, I think that's going to be the critical element. And it's also asserting that it's going to contain the title and it's going to contain the description. So if those things are present and the feed class itself is producing valid RSS data, then I think we win. Okay, so let's go. I think the URLs file is done. Let's go back to the feeds area and import the thing that it says to import, which is this. We've got a feed, and now we're going to take a class of announcement feed and going to subclass from feed. And let's give this a good doc string instead of just a pass. Say generate an RSS feed that MailChimp or any feed reader can import. Okay, that kind of hints at the use case that we're going for. And coming back to here. Ooh. Wow. This will be fun. Getting into, so this is telling me, so the Django views system, if you are using generic views, they are really good about saying, well, they're not super good. Like they could be better. They could always be better. But they're pretty good about saying, you didn't do this. You didn't configure this right. It's pretty clear to me that the feed system does not have that level of checking on people, probably because it's a corner of Django that is not used nearly as much. So we've got to figure out what these errors are saying. So the first thing to note is it's saying the URL. So URL is none, and I know that starts with is a string method. So we're missing some kind of URL. So maybe rather than guess, though, we should look at what it says, what the documentation says you have to include before we dive too deep into the errors, because we don't really know what we're doing. Sounds like, I don't know if there needs to be a title. The other thing that we can do at the end of this process is inspect the full content of what the feed generates from the test and see what it looks like and see if it matches up with what we expect. Okay, so it looks like we need minimally a title, a link, and a description. This kind of thing right here, I don't like doing this. I don't know why this is here in this way. Django's system tells you repeatedly to try and use stuff like reverse when you're in Python code, so that if you ever move something around, you can get the right link to something. So having a class level attribute, because you can't run reverse right here. That's not going to, I'm pretty sure that doesn't work, because Django at module load time, Django has not loaded all the apps, so it can't reliably do reverse. And if you try to do a reverse there, I think it'll give you some error like apps not ready or something like that. That is something that happens when you do something too early before the rest of the Django system is essentially booted and ready to go. Okay, so we have the items. This is essentially looks like the equivalent of a query set that we have to provide. That is going to be what it's reading from, and then it's looking for a title and description from our items. So that's pretty cool. And we also need an item link. Okay, we can supply that though. And okay, so now they're giving us more information. Title, link, and description, those 3 class level attributes correspond to standard title, link, and description elements respectively. Is there no other way? Can we not define that from a function or a method? I don't think it really matters because MailChimp's probably not going to care. It's going to be most interested in the individual items that are in there, I think. But I don't know. We'll get to more of the details. Let's see if we can get the basics passing, even if it's non-optimal. And if it does, then we can explore making the RSS feed better. So let's say the title is, we'll call it announcements from ship. And then the link, I don't know. Well, there is an announcements page, so that's probably the best fit. Like this. And description. Well, where do I put it from the description? Announcements for homeless in Frederick County, Maryland. Okay. What happens if we run the test now? I'm curious. So we still haven't provided items yet, so it's still not happy there. And so let's do that. We need to create the items method. It's going to be self. And what do we want to return? We'll probably need to write some better tests. Like the test that we have is just testing that 1 is there. But I don't want the feed to be just every announcement ever, because over time, like in theory, this organization could be using this for years. If it's selected, it could be using it for a long time because they might just be happy with it. There's a lot of organizations, especially nonprofits, which is what this one is, that if they get some code, they'll just let it run as long as they can. That does have some downsides if you're not dealing with like security properly, but we can be pretty responsible about that. So it looks like this items thing can take a query set, so that's good. So we're going to say announcement, objects, and let's order by, well, do we even need that? Because I might have added an ordering on the announcements model. Yeah, I added ordering on the expiration date, so we don't even need an explicit order by. So let's say all, but then let's do a slice. And a slice of the last 5. And then we need to add the import to the model. So we're going to come to here and say dot models import announcement. Okay, so what does that do? The dot model is the path relative import syntax if you've never seen it before. So it says look in the current directory, the current package directory, find the models module, and then get the announcement class that is in there. That's what that's all about. The announcement is the model, and we're doing using the manager from the model, and we're saying all of them, but only give me the last 5. And so if you do, if you look at this, this is going to return a query set. And if you look at the query on the query set, there will be a limit 5 in the generated SQL. So the statement that's actually going to the database is only going to pull the latest 5. The other thing that comes into play here is that I've added this ordering on the expires at. So it's not only going to just pull the last 5, but it's also for every query going to give an ordering on them. So it should only ever be pulling the latest 5 announcements that are last to expire. In other words, the newest 5 announcements to consider. We could probably see that if we take this and say, this is going to be a query set, and we can print, we should be able to print the query set query. Just to kind of prove it out. Still probably going to get some failures because we haven't added items title or URL yet. And hopefully somewhere in here will be our actual query. But I'm not seeing it. There it is. Okay. So it's a select statement, and there's an order by on expires at, as I said, and it's a descending order because that's what the negative on there is for. And there's the limit of 5 because we're doing a slice. So it's doing exactly the query that we expect. We'll write some tests for that in a minute. But let's delete this junk because we don't need any of that extra stuff. So we're going to have it be return, and I'm satisfied with what that items is going to be returning. The other bit that it said is it needs to get from the list of items, it needs to get the item title, and it's going to receive an item here. So I imagine that the flow of this is that the feed does the call to the items method, gets the query set, and starts to loop over them. And as it's building the RSS feed, it knows it needs to put in a title for each item in the RSS. So it takes the item of whatever model that is and pumps it in to this item title record, item title method. And that method produces a title in some fashion. And then the returned value is what's actually going into the feed. We have frankly a 1-for-1 mapping here. So this is actually about as clear, cut and dry as this can be, of having an item title like this match up exactly with the item title of the announcement itself. So that's that value. And then we need the item description. Again, these things are named in perfect synchronicity, I guess is the right word. So it's going to return the description from the announcement, and that should be all the details there. And then finally, it wants a URL. And so the URLs, as I said, we deleted we don't have a specific page just for announcements. So I can't do an announcement detail page, but what I can do is the announcements page with an anchor tag, or an anchor, what do they call it? A fragment? Whatever, there's a terminology for when you have the octothorpe or the pound sign in the URL to point to something else. We can point to the right thing there. So the final bit is I call it item link. Def item link. It's going to take the item and it's going to return. We need a reverse. So hold on one second. From Django URLs, import reverse. And we're going to do a reverse on announcements list. And then what we'll tack onto this is the fragment that I was talking about. So that would be f of hash announcement, and then item pk. And this is very specific to this application and this template. Like if I go bring up the announcements template, you can see the section that it's defined in to know why this is all linked together. So here we are, we're looping over the announcements, and you can see we've got an identifier here of announcement dash ID. I guess I could, instead of PK, I could do ID to make that clearer. So what that'll do is, because the hash is added on there, when the page loads, it will try and find the HTML element marked by that ID and jump straight to that. So it's the closest thing that we have to linking directly to a specific announcement. Okay. And we lost our test. Let's bring the test file back up. So we've added the 3 minimal elements. Responses content is not valid HTML. Okay, let's change this. I think there's a flag here, if I recall. You can say HTML is false. I think what it's trying to do is parse it and be smarter about it. Ooh, interesting. Now we're getting 404. Well, that doesn't seem right. So I did something wrong along the way. Let's go back to Test Plus and make sure I understand what that HTML parameter is doing, because I don't. And I think I did it wrong. Oh. I know. That doesn't go there. It goes on here. It goes on the response contains. So let's do HTML of false on those. And now it should hopefully treat it as raw content. Great. It did. Okay, let's see what that content is. This is what I'm super curious to see. So we're going to print out the response content, and I'm adding the assert false here because if you don't, let me actually just show you. I've got a print, and I want to see the content. But if I run the test passes. And in PyTest, when the test passes, it's not going to show you anything else. It's like you're done. It's everything's working. So, but if you add in some kind of assertion to make the test fail on purpose, and the easiest one to do that is assert false, then what it does is try and gives you the extra diagnostic information, so you can see the extra content. And now we've got what's actually in everything. And here's the content of the feed. That looks like complete rubbish to read though. So maybe this is not the best place to see it. So we've got the test passing, which is great. Let's go take a look at it, because now we should be able to access it from announcements feed. Is where it should live. So we'll come back to the Ship Haven website. No, we don't need my email. Come on. And we'll go to announcements. And I'm going to tack on feed at the end. Oh, hello. Well, that's odd. So I don't know what it's doing here. So I feel like that should be returning a response type that is type XML. It's kind of weird that it's giving a plain text type. Let me see what we can see from the network tab of what happened. Okay, let's cancel that and then inspect this. Okay, it is saying the type is an RSS XML. So I don't know when Firefox started doing that. I thought it would display the XML in browser, but clearly it doesn't do that anymore. Maybe we can try in Chrome. Maybe Chrome will behave a little better. Not better, just in a way that we can actually inspect it here. So I'm going to bring up Chrome so y'all can see it well, resize it a little bit, and then try to put in the feed. Okay, that's not any better, but at least you can, it's still the content. But to me, this looks like a valid feed. It's declaring the XML type at the top. It's declaring that it's an RSS and giving the namespace of where the parser can figure that out. And the details of the rest of this look like stuff that you'd see in a feed. Here's the title that we added. Here's the link, which is including the domain and the URL, so that'll, when it finally lives on its final site, that'll connect it to the right thing. There's the description of everything in there. And then we get into the details of each individual link, including like times and all of that stuff, and the content, etc., etc. And there are a couple of items in my feed in my local database, so that's actually what we're seeing. So we're seeing two separate items. This is a different one. Cool. I think that's enough to prove that it's working. So there's probably, I want to add 2 more tests. I want to make sure that if we, I want to make sure that the limiting is right. That if we make 5 announcements, then or the 6th one won't appear. And what else should we test? No, that's probably good enough. One more test, and then we'll be done, and then I'll deploy it and share it with my team, which is awesome. All right, back to the code. Stop the browser or the web server and say test limit items. And we'll, as a test doc string, we'll say a limited number of items is in the feed. I happen to know that the limit is 5. So if we do for I in range, do you have to give range a starting number? I don't remember. We'll try it without range and see if that works. I can't recall if it needs a starting range. And we'll say announcement factory. Okay, so the important thing is to make sure we get the oldest one. So if these are executing in time, these are programmed to, the announcement factory is programmed to take a timestamp from, what am I trying to say? From each time. Each time you call it, it will take the timezone.now timestamp, and it's adding on a time delta to make sure it exists in the future. So the 5, if we want the 5 latest, then we need to put an announcement before if we're trying to verify that that one is not there. So this one should be the oldest one. We could even go farther and say, let's do that. Let's go from Django utils import time zone, and we also want to import date time, and we'll explicitly make an announcement that exists like in the past, so it is definitely going to be behind these other 5. So we'll say expires at is time zone dot now minus date time delta of a day. So this is just trying to make some data that's definitely old in this system. And then we will call the same thing, and I think we just need a single assertion that, in fact, to make this even more clear, because there's a very slim chance that the titles between factory generated data could be the same. So we'll give it an explicit title that we're going to look for, and we'll say that it is not going to be there. And then we can check that not going to be there is we don't want our response contains, because this will fail because it's saying couldn't find it. Not surprising. That was exactly what I wanted to try and check. So we can't use assert response contains. Instead, we're going to do assert that not going to be there is not in response content decode. Why am I decoding? Well, first let me see if it's passing. Let's see if it fails without the decode. I think it will, because I think we're comparing the wrong types. Yeah. Django response content that goes out on the web server goes out as bytes. So in order to, like, if you have special characters, like accented characters, things that are not in standard English, which is super common all over the world, then that data is taken from its Unicode format, which is, when it would appear something you'd want to read as an accented character, and it is encoded, changed from its Unicode representation into a byte representation. You're turning it into code, bytes code. Okay. So that's what a response content is. To do the verification properly, Python 3 is a lot more picky, maybe that's not the right word, specific about what you have to compare. So what's happening here is the string that I'm testing, not going to be there. Python 3, a string is Unicode, so that's Unicode. So we're trying to compare Unicode characters, which is considered data that has been decoded and has the proper representation, against raw bytes. And Python 3 says, no, you can't do that anymore. We need to actually compare the real thing. So in order to do a proper comparison, we run decode on it. And that's going to pass it through, I think the defaulting decoding is UTF-8. So it'll take it assumes that the content is encoded into UTF-8 as the byte format, and it's going to decode that, change that encoding, and put the stuff into a string of Unicode. So now that by doing the decode, what we're left with is an apples to apples comparison of data types. It took me a really long time to wrap my head around Unicode and encoding and decoding. So if that doesn't make sense to you, I don't blame you. But if it did, great. So now, hopefully the test passes. And what if we say what if we print response content decode just to see what's in there and take out the not? This should fail, and here's all the content. So this kind of just gives us the confidence that there are a bunch of items in the RSS feed, just not the one that we expect to be missing. That's good. And in fact, we can see it here because the database is getting wiped between each test. So when new records are created, they're given the PK values, the primary key values, the IDs are starting over again. So our first one is going to have ID 1. And if you're looking at this RSS feed and checking out the links, remember we built the link from the ID. And so the newest one that's in here is one with ID 6, and the oldest one that shows up at the end is ID 2. And the one that's missing is ID 1, which is the one we expect. So we'll do that. And test passes. Both the tests should pass. And that's pretty cool. I'm still not super thrilled that we have to hard code in the link here. There's perhaps a way, I'm going to spend like the 1 minute to check if there's a way to get this link not from a class attribute, but rather from a method. If there's not, then fine. At least I'll have done my due diligence and checked on it. So let's go into the code. This is in the syndication framework. So let's go to Django, check the master, and we'll go to contrib. We'll go down to syndication, and this was in views. Oh, it's interesting. You can learn all sorts of stuff here. So it's trying to get absolute URL if you have it defined. I'm looking specifically for link. So let's keep jumping. Get dynamic attribute link from object. Oh, okay. I wonder if we could get away with making this a property. I bet that would work. Yeah, let's try that. So instead of using a class attribute, let's change this to a property. We'll say link, and then we'll do a reverse on announcements feed and ditch this. I'm going to comment it out for now and run the test. Yeah, cool. Okay, I still want to see it. I don't know if that's probably paranoid of me, but okay, I'll be okay being paranoid. So let's do content and then delete that. And link is announcements feed. Oh, that's not what I wanted. I was using announcement list instead. Nope, wrong spot. So you can tell it's getting late. I'm making all sorts of silly mistakes at this point. Okay, I'll try the test again. Whoa. Why did you do that? That's like rendering the page. What's going on there? Oh, I saved it with the list. Okay. All right, there it is. Finished it off. It's got the proper link correctly from a reverse rather than from the class attribute. So I'm happy. Okay, and then we'll check the whole suite. All the tests pass. And let's check. Wow, I just made some changes. Let's see what we've got. We created a new feed. It's got a title, a description, and a link. The link is properly coming from reverse. We get the last 5 items. The ordering comes into play, so we're making sure that it's ordered by expires. That is just coming by default. We define how it gets the title, the description, and the link for each of those announcements. And we have a couple of tests on it and the URL. Super. We'll say add announcements RSS feed. Push that up. And just to show off the final little bit, here's how you can do a Heroku deploy. This is what I like about Heroku. You hook up a remote. If I do a git remote -v, you can see the source code living on GitHub at this origin, but we also add this Heroku remote, and it's the remote to that shrouded temple URL that I gave you earlier. And if the way to do a deploy is by doing a git push to that remote to the master branch there. And as soon as you do that, Heroku is showing back information of what it's building, and it's putting together your application. It's taking the code, trying to install all the packages in there. It's trying to do as much as it can from the cache. In this case, it's detecting that it's a Django application, so it's running collect static to get the static files, and it does discovery of what's in your proc file here, so it knows to run a release command. It knows how to run the web, and you can see my final app when it was all built was 56 megabytes in total. It runs the release command, which does migration, and you can see that the migration ran to add the organization name that was missing, and then that's it. And now if I go and bring up the shrouded, if I bring up the admin of this site, we're now looking at shrouded temple here, which is where this thing is living. And we look at services and go to add a service. Then we've got the organization name, that new name that we were requiring. So all this is done. The site has all the stuff. We could go, well, there is an announcement on here. There's one announcement. So we could look at, well, actually we won't be able to because Firefox is going to prompt us to download it, but this should not fail, at least not with a 404. So we're getting a file that contains the feed. So that's good. And everything's there. What's left on this before the presentation tomorrow is to populate some fake services to show off. That's all that's there. And then it's kind of up to the organization to decide if they want this. I think it's a pretty compelling application. I find it to be pretty neat. It was a fun project to put together in a couple of weeks, and there is a little bit more work to do if we're going to do this. Like as I said, the MailChimp stuff, the actual sign up, we made the RSS feed available, but the sign up itself is not there. So we need to drop in a form so that someone could actually provide their email address to sign up. That's one thing that needs to be done. And then if this organization wants to do this, we have to actually do the connection between this Heroku application and the URL, the domain from this group. And so the plan is that what we pitched to the director is it would live at a subdomain, something like haven.shipfrederick.com. And that would give a pretty clear place that's very separate from their main WordPress app, so that it doesn't step on the toes of anybody. It's a totally separate thing. And then we've talked about doing some other things too that, as simple as this is, people are not going to remember that Ship Frederick is a homeless thing, let alone that haven.shipfrederick.com exists. So we've talked about buying a local domain that we could use as a marketing tool. I have a realtor on my team, and he's very accustomed to doing this. If you ever seen people trying to sell houses where they buy like some domain just to get your attention on a house, like this is his thing. So he's right in his wheelhouse, and we might do something exactly like that. That would do a redirect that would get people something memorable that they can get to the site and then show up at the proper location. I think what I'm most pleased about all of this stuff is that we made a responsive mobile web application. It's functional. You can click around and it brings up things that you're used to in your mobile app. Your dialers, your maps, all of this stuff has connections right to the things that you expect. The other thing that I didn't even show off is we added the add to home screen feature. So if people want to get to this without punching it in, or going specifically from a Chrome browser to the URL, and want a quick access that does a full screen experience of all of this, that's in there too. And so I think it's all come together quite nicely. I have been going on for a very long time. I'm looking at my clock here, and it's something coming on 2 hours. So I think that's where we're gonna leave off for the night. Hopefully you enjoyed seeing building an app for a hackathon, something that came together. This is the kind of work that it takes to get 3 pages onto the internet, but at a quality level that I think is that will make people in our community happy. So as a reminder to you, if you're in your community and you have the opportunity to be part of a hackathon and find some way to contribute back, maybe it's not even a hackathon, maybe there's other things that you can do, I would highly encourage that. It's a good opportunity to meet folks in your town and do something that your community can value. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for tuning in. You were here for a long time, so hopefully you found that valuable. With that, I'm going to sign off. I will take the content. Fruit, I'm having a little trouble understanding your question here. Is that a program I can recommend that improved my work or life? Can you expand on that a little bit? I'm happy to try and answer, but I guess I'm got late streaming brain, and my ability to process questions might be a little diminished. If your question is like where can you find stuff that improved, that helps your community, I think it kind of depends on where you live. There's a lot of city services that you might have if you're in a small city, that ways you can get involved, contact local IT departments. A lot of our stuff, so this in particular hackathon is sponsored by, do I have a link? I do. So there's a group in Frederick where I live called Tech Frederick, and it's a kind of a hub for where technology companies in my city can come together. What PC program? Oh, I'm sorry. I think I'm getting your question a little bit better now. What do good productivity booster? Pomodoro. That's my answer. Pomodoro. And I don't use it on the PC, but I have a Pomodoro app, and I'm on. This is an Android phone. It's a Pixel 2, and I have a little app here. I'll do a plug for them because I found it to be a useful little app. It is called, what is it called? Focus to Do, something like that. And I was really skeptical about using the Pomodoro technique. I don't know if you're familiar with it, But the idea behind a Pomodoro is you set a timer for 25 minutes. And during that 25-minute period, you work on whatever the topic is for that one thing. So I think I said earlier in the stream that I should have a big article coming out tomorrow. I've got a tracking on it. It's an article about Django models, and then this is way too small for any of you to read, but it says I've done 27 Pomodoros to write this article. It's very lengthy, but during each of those Pomodoros, the idea is like you focused all your attention on that specific thing. No checking Twitter, no checking Facebook, Instagram, whatever your guilty pleasure is for distracting yourself. You commit to working for that 25 minutes on that thing. And for me personally, using this as a tool to aid on my side projects, it helps immensely to get just some really focused time on something, and you'll be surprised at what you can crank out in 25 minutes. And if you keep going, you can, if you have the once you get, what I find is once I get one of those going and I'm getting in a groove, I just kind of crank on to the next one, because I've gotten in that groove and it's like, all right, all my focus is here. I'm just going to keep going. So that's what I find is my biggest productivity booster. In terms of actual tooling, there's all sorts of stuff that people use that I don't find a lot of value in, simply because I'm not tempted in some of the ways. Oh, you're welcome. For instance, like I know that there are people that have like a really hard time like checking something like Twitter, and they do it like compulsively. And there are programs that will like let you block entire domains on your computer and lock you out. I think I used to be that way sort of years ago, but haven't really felt much need for that kind of tool in that time. So that's what I find most useful. Anyway, wrapping up the stream, I'm going to take this content and I will put it up on YouTube. So if you want to refer back to something I did that was either good, bad, or ugly, you're welcome to do that. And thank you all for tuning in, and I'll see you next week, hopefully. Take care.